Hello, everyone, and welcome to SGTI's Interspiritual Luminaries. We are pleased today to have with us as our special guest, Rabbi Rami Shapiro. And I am Jan Lundy, the co-founder, co-director of SGTI, and
I am Jeanette Banishak, and it is great to be with you in this space. And if you are listening to this recording, welcome as well.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome, everyone.
I'm going to provide a bit of an introduction and a first question for Rabbi Rami. And we did provide some questions ahead of time, but in moments like these, sometimes we're just open to the unfolding, the spontaneous unfolding of it. So we are just thrilled to be in this space. Rabbi Rami, thank you so much for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening. And
My pleasure.
I'll give an introduction. One is a bit of a formal introduction, and one is a personal piece. Rabbi Rami Shapiro. Rabbi Rami is an author, teacher, and speaker on the subjects of liberal Judaism and contemporary spirituality. He is an award-winning author of over 36 books on religion and spirituality. He received rabbinical ordination from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion and holds a PhD in religion from Union Graduate School. Rami co-directs the One River Foundation, which we are big fans of, and is a contributing editor at Spirituality and Health magazine, where he writes the Roadside Assistance for the Spiritual Traveler column and hosts the magazine's podcast, Spirituality and Health with Rabbi Rami. And the personal piece that I would like to add is that I don't know if you remember this, Rabbi Rami, but we talked with you at the beginning of our time with SGTI, and early next week, we will celebrate 6 years of the Spiritual Guidance Training Institute. And you were one of the first people that we contacted and talked with, you and Frank. And so we are so grateful to have this moment around our birthday, these moments with you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm sure we tried to talk you out of it, but we were wrong. And so you've had six good, successful years. That's very exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting.
So happy birthday. And on behalf of Frank and myself, we hope you have 6,000 more years. But you don't have to run it for that long. We'll let somebody else take it on.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Wanted to start out with hearing a little bit about you. We've heard this bio, but why did we ask you to be a part of this? One of the intersections is about interspirituality. And so are there additional things or nuances that you would like to tell us about to kind of orient us to who you are?
Well, I think in the context of, what you all do, and maybe in the context of this conversation, the most important thing to know about me is that I am what Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, my Rebbe, my spiritual guru in Judaism, he called me a Jewish practitioner of perennial wisdom. And the noun there is perennial wisdom. The adjective is Jewish, but the focus of my life is, my spiritual life especially, is perennial wisdom. Perennial wisdom is the fourfold truths at the heart, the mystic heart of every religious tradition. And I mean, they're real simple. The first one is everything is a manifesting of this singular non-dual reality called by many names: God, Mother, Nature, Brahman, Tao. The list is endless probably. Everything is a manifesting of that. That's number one. Number two, human beings have the innate capacity to awaken in, with, and as this reality. I have a lot of names that I like for it, but in Hebrew, there's one that's really perfect, I think, for me. It's chayut, aliveness. So everything is a manifesting of this aliveness. You and I have the innate capacity to awaken in, with, and as this aliveness. Point 3 is when you awaken to this aliveness, you're internally called to what the Bible calls in Genesis 12:3, be a blessing to all the families of the earth. And I understand that to mean you be a blessing by living according to the golden rule. The Jewish version of the golden rule is, what is hateful to you, don't do to somebody else. So those are the first 3. And the fourth is awakening to aliveness and being a blessing is the highest calling of every human being. That to me is the spiritual foundation of the human life. And then you've got a Christian version and a Jewish version, a Muslim, Hindu, Taoist, version of it, earth honoring versions, feminist versions. But those 4 points are the foundation. Everything else is the flavor it comes to you in. And I enjoy the different flavors. I find them infinitely fascinating. But it's the grounding in that fourfold truth that really, in my mind, gives those different flavors their authenticity. That's the most important thing, I think, about me and my spiritual life.
Thank you for sharing that. I have read about the priorities that you just mentioned, the foundation that you just mentioned, especially from your One River site, yours and Frank's foundation. And earlier, right before we started recording this, we were talking about you said reorienting your priorities since COVID. And I wonder, some of those foundational concepts, do those relate to any of this reorientation of your priorities?
What COVID did for me, and I didn't have COVID. No one in my immediate family had COVID. I had an aunt die from COVID early on. But in my immediate circle, we didn't have the disease. What COVID did for me was strip away everything that was non-essential. I discovered, because I basically locked in my house for all that period, I discovered I was doing a lot of things just to keep busy, I guess you might say. A lot of it was distraction. I'm in OA, Overeaters Anonymous. I wrestle with my eating. I wrestle with food. And I discovered, and I should have known, because I'm following the 12 steps. I should have seen this more clearly than I did. But I was eating out a lot. And I was telling myself, well, I'm better off eating out because that's portion control. That's what I told myself, as opposed to eating at home when I just keep eating. So I was eating out a lot, spending a lot of money eating out a lot, even though I ate very simply, but still eating out a lot. And I couldn't do that during COVID because the restaurants were closed. And I found that I was, in a sense, addicted to eating out. And I couldn't do that anymore. So I had to drop that distraction, that practice, that behavior. I found that I was traveling a lot. Ostensibly, I was telling myself, well, to share these teachings and to spread the word about perennial wisdom. But I discovered when I could no longer do it, that I really didn't miss it. And I think that I was, despite what I told myself, it was selfless service, spread the word, that it was all about ego, that I was just going out there because I loved being in front of a crowd. The other day, this past Sunday, I went to a poetry reading in my town. They do it every month, and my son is very involved. He's a professor of English at the university here. He's very involved in the local writing community, and he reads his poetry and other people's poems. And his 7-year-old son, my 7-year-old grandson, said he wanted to read a poem. Now, he can't really read yet. So my son found him basically a 1 or 2 line poem, which he memorized, and he got up in front of the group and he took the microphone and he stood there like a stand-up comedian holding the mic, and he read his poem. And when the event was over, he took me, we were walking, just the two of us, and he said to me, and he calls me Za. We tried to get him to call me Zaidi, which is Yiddish for grandfather, but he just never got it. So he calls me Za. And he says, Za, I love mics, meaning microphones. He goes, I love mics. I want more mics, meaning I want more time in front of mics and audiences. And I said, okay, well, you've taken a theater class. You get some more of that if you like. He goes, I just love mics. And I realized, so do I. And it was, no, when you're 7, that's great. Go learn how to be in front of groups, learn how to communicate. That's great. But when you're 70, I mean, I'm 70, it's going to complete 72 years. He says, when you're that old, maybe you should stop loving mics so much, that I don't need to be in front of them all the time, that I don't need to travel around for the applause and the accolades and all of that, which is what I think I was doing. So COVID said, you don't need to do that. You can't do it. So what happens when you can't? Well, I found a tremendous release and relief from the life I was living. I didn't have to eat out all the time. I didn't have to distract myself. I didn't have to spend enormous amount of time in airports. And I didn't need to do any of that stuff. I spent more time walking, and I was an avid walker. Now I spend more time walking. I spend more time reading. It's just shifted my priorities to focus on the two things, I think, besides family, but I mean, just spiritual things, the two things that really matter to me, which is perennial wisdom, and then how perennial wisdom can be articulated simply in a Jewish context. And just to teach those primarily over Zoom. I don't need to go anywhere. So my life has become much simpler and more liberated, I guess I'd say. And that's, boy, this sounds terrible, especially if you had COVID personally, or if COVID impacted you. Again, I had one, an aunt die, but if it hit you even more profoundly than that, I don't want to say COVID was a blessing, but that's how COVID freed me from so much of what I was doing and reoriented my priorities.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and for the intimate stories as well.
Rami, I have a question that is, I love stories. I love how you tell stories. We stand on your shoulders, as an interspiritual organization. You were there in the beginning doing the real work with Father Thomas Keating and so many others about, how do we bring this forward to people? I think calling you a founder of the interspirituality movement, the perennial wisdom movement, as we know it today, it seems fitting. And yet I know there were many other people that, you journeyed with to make this happen for us.
No, there weren't. It was just me.
It's just you. Can you tell us about that time? Can you tell us what it was like and what you did in those early years to really come together with others, like-minded others, to bring this into a greater conversation? We'd love to know.
I can tell you, my story in a sense, but it had nothing to do with me. I mean, if you're going to say you were standing on my shoulders, which if true, I will send you the bills from my chiropractic. But I came to this through Father Thomas Keating. And if he were alive, he would say that he invited me. He heard of me somehow. That's not my understanding. My understanding is that Father Thomas invited my rabbi, Zalman Schachter Shalomi, to work with him, but Zalman wasn't able to do it. And Zalman suggested me. That's how Father Thomas heard of me. But however it happened, it was Father Thomas Keating who invited me to work with him and his original Snowmass group of people. There were 12 of us to gather at Snowmass at his monastery in Snowmass, Colorado, to explore what would happen if you brought 12 contemplatives from different traditions together to practice as opposed to preach. I mean, I'm being little, the alliteration is what's capturing me here, practice and preach. But rather than, and Father Thomas made this explicit. He said, look, the one rule is don't tell us what Jews believe or Buddhists believe. Don't tell us even what you believe. Just talk about your experience in your practice. And we spent, I think it was 10 days every year for the program itself. The experiment itself went on for 35 years. So I only checked, I was there for a few years and then would plug in and out over the intervening years. But he said, you talk about your experience. And what we discovered, I would guess within 2 days, is two things. One, nobody was having an experience. And I'm going to come back to that. Nobody was having an experience. And number two, when we talked about the experience we weren't having, we were all saying the same thing, though our language was unique to our tradition. So let me unpack that. Nobody was having an experience because there was nobody there to experience anything. What happens in these contemplative practices is that, in my case, Rami eventually disappears in the breathing and the chanting and the mantra and the whatever practice you're doing. Eventually, my sense of me evaporates. And there's, well, I don't know what there is because I'm not there to say, right? That whole sense of myself is gone. Whatever happens when that happens, I have no idea. Then Rami is reconstituted and returns to normal waking state consciousness. I have some, and then I tell a story basically about what happened when I wasn't there, if that makes any sense. Something happened, though it didn't happen to me because I wasn't there. But whatever happened has an impact on the me that comes back after the experience or after the event or after, whatever you want to call it an event, I guess. After the event has passed, I return, but I return differently than I was when I went into it. I don't know if this is making any sense. One of my teachers said that you go into the experience like a piece of Velveeta cheese, thick, waxy, solid, and then you come back like Swiss cheese. Still have a square shape, but you're full of holes. So you're still there, but you're not there in that solid way you were before. When we talked about whatever was happening when we were gone, we were talking about the same thing. We'd use words like oneness, terms like non-duality, and a sense of compassion. We use the language of our traditions, but if you translated them, we were all speaking to the same point. And the same point is the points of perennial wisdom. We came back realizing that we were all unique manifestings of something non-dual, something, the same thing, whatever that is, the same Brahman, the same mind, the same consciousness. And that when we came back, we always felt more love from, or compassion from, and compassion for, or love for everything. And everyone felt that. It didn't matter what your methodology was, because ultimately the methodology brought you to a place of, well, I don't know what, because you were gone, but the methodology was gone and you were gone. And then the methodology came back and you came back and you told your story. There's a wonderful, this is going on longer than I intended, but there's this wonderful parable, metaphor, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a metaphor, that's used in the Hasidic Jewish world. from Reb Nachman of Bratslav. He's the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, lived in I think in Ukraine in the 1800s. And Nachman uses this term rishimu. It means residue, but this is the context in which he uses it. He says you go to a perfume store and you buy very expensive perfume, and you get a little bottle of it, and you take it home and you place it on a countertop, and you take the stopper out of the bottle and you leave the bottle on the counter open, and you just leave it, you walk away. Eventually, the perfume will evaporate, and you come back and the bottle is empty. But you know the bottle contained perfume because the bottle is suffused, the glass itself is suffused with the smell of the perfume. The room is permeated with the smell of the perfume. You knew perfume had been there, but the perfume itself is no longer there. And the permeation of the perfume, the residue, the smell, is what's called in Hebrew, rishimu. And so applying it to the spiritual practice, you're gone, but when you come back, there's a rishimu, a fragrance of what had happened. And the fragrance is the fragrance of compassion, if that's not stretching the metaphor too far. And everybody had it. Everybody had it. And that's how you know this stuff is true, because you can experience it directly, regardless of the tradition you come from.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, putting it in perspective for us too. I want to remind everybody that feel free to type any questions into the chat that you wish to offer Rabbi Rami.
Rabbis live for questions.
I'm sitting with these metaphors, and I didn't know you were going to end right then, and I was still taking notes. So I'm sensing a bit of a segue to an additional question that relates to how we titled this. And it has to do with the term beyond belief. Beyond belief as it relates to perennial wisdom. And Elizabeth Drescher's work in Choosing Our Religion discusses how individuals who identify as nuns or unaffiliated are concerned less with the language and belief systems and more with becoming. So I wondered if you could talk about this a little bit. Any thoughts, opinions, feelings, insights? Is this becoming a kind of awakening? Is Rishimu, is that a part of this?
So I would say a couple of things. First of all, I do my best to avoid the word belief. Beyond belief, I like that idea. Yeah. Because belief is, belief's an idea that we affirm. When I believe something, I'm saying it's true without any evidence that it's true, right? I'll never say to you, I believe I have a sister. I know I have a sister. I might say, given that my time zone is 12:30 on a Thursday, I might say that I think my sister is home. So I might say, oh, I know I have a sister. I believe my sister is home, because I don't know, but I believe she's home. But, talking about God, I would never say I believe in God. I experience God. God is reality. God is, everything. So I don't believe in reality. I experience reality. So going beyond belief, because belief is just a cultural construct, beyond belief to experience reality directly. That's what I think that's what I think we should be talking about. The word becoming, I'm not sure if that's right. And the reason I question it is this way, I question it because of this. Becoming implies time. In my understanding, you're already God, right? Because God is everything. You don't become God. You're it, right? So I love the metaphor of the ocean and the wave that's, Hindus use, that everything is this divine ocean, or God is this infinite divine ocean, and everything that you and I experience, including ourselves, are waves of the ocean. The wave doesn't become the ocean. You might say the ocean becomes a wave for a moment, and then the wave stops and the ocean just keeps going. But you don't become the ocean. You don't become God. You're already God. So if I say I'm becoming God, that implies I'm not God yet. And then we've got a dualistic system of there's God and there's not me, but I'm getting closer, I'm getting closer, I'm going to be it soon. But that's not the way it works. There's just God. And then God is happening as you and me and other people or other things and, all reality. So I'm hesitant to introduce time into this. You either get it or you don't, but you already are it. So people who identify, and I also don't like the term nuns. It's negative. Why would someone say they don't have a choice? I mean, Pew says, that's what Pew came up with it, no religion, so I'm a nun. But in my book on perennial wisdom, I coined the term spiritually independent because it's positive. I'm not none. I'm a spiritually independent person. I think, I experience what I experience. I think it through for myself, whatever it is. But I wouldn't define myself in a negative. But people who are spiritually independent or nuns, people who are attracted to perennial wisdom, these individuals are too, I don't know what you want to say, are too, whatever I say is going to sound so chutzpahdik in Yiddish, so over the top. They're too open-minded, they're too open-hearted, they're too smart, they're too wise to imagine that one religion is it, right? Nobody in the 21st century should belong to a religion. They should say, look, my roots are in my case, Judaism, but there's wisdom in Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam and Christianity and secularism and Taoism, and right? Because the reality with a capital R is so huge, there is no one language that can grasp all of it. And just because I was born a Jew doesn't mean I have to wear the Jewish blinders so I can't see the beauty of all the other traditions and all the nuances and subtleties they can reveal about the reality in which I live and of which I am a part. Just because my mother was Jewish, I have to say, nope, can't look at it, can't look at it. I mean, that's so ridiculous. It's always been ridiculous, but in the 21st century, it's just stupid. So people who are truly nuns, unless they're just wearing the gigantic blinder of religion is bad, spirituality is bad, I don't want to know anything. But if they're nuns or spiritually independent in the sense that they're open to wisdom wherever they find it, these are people who are constantly, ideally maybe, blossoming into greater and greater subtleties of wisdom coming from all these different traditions that will eventually take them to the beyond, in the sense of beyond belief, into that experience of the ineffable. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm riffing on the language anyway.
Yeah, you can answer whatever question you hear. Of course. No, I appreciate this and challenging us to consider how we are biasing, like we have a bias for time when we use language like becoming. And I don't know if you know, but you and Jan must have been riding the same wave of that ocean, because she also was talking about spiritual independence and then found that you were too. And it seems to be a much more, as you say, positive, helpful term. Also, I like spiritual interdependent, especially in the West.
Yeah, well, Wayne Teasdale came up with the interspiritual term, and which was brilliant. I mean, he was brilliant. I mean, that's sort of back to what Jan had mentioned about standing on people's shoulders. I mean, there was Father Thomas, Brother Wayne Teasdale, Cynthia Bourgeot. I mean, there's just Sister Jose Habde. I mean, there were some. I mean, should be very careful. Cynthia Bourgeault is still living. So I don't want to make it sound like Cynthia's died like the rest of us, the people I mentioned. But I don't know if it was, I'm making this up, but there seems to be certain moments in human history where there's an explosion of spiritual awakening that manifests in people from different traditions, and sometimes, especially in modern times, because you can see it in late 1800s, times when people can come together. And of course, we come together more easily now than we did even 100-something years ago. When people can come together and they can be in proximity with one another, that these explosions become more and more rich. So you can have, Father Thomas and Sister Jose Habde and Wayne Teasdale and Andrew Harvey and Cynthia Bourgeault and Reb Zalman all together in the same place at the same time. And there's many more that I'm not mentioning. And they're all blossoming in each other's presence, creating a greater opening of, the lotus or something that is just phenomenal. And if you happen to be touched by that, especially if you can be touched by that in real time, as I was, it's just transformative. It's really amazing. So we are living, now in almost April of 2023, we're sort of living in maybe it's the Rishimu of that, because so many of those people have passed away. Those waves have died down. And I don't know if my sense is, and maybe it's just my own bias, because I loved those people and they're all gone and I feel they're lost tremendously. So I don't know if it's the same thing, if that thing continues to happen at the same intensity, but I miss that intensity because they're gone. So I don't know if it continues in the same way, but it'll rebirth. There'll be another explosion at some other point. Maybe when Jan hits 80, and she'll be, the grandmother of another explosion. I mean, who knows? Can we just take up Jeffrey's question in the chat?
Yes,
said we would.
let me read that for you. Thank you for the question, Jeffrey. You mentioned your desire to articulate perennial wisdom for a Jewish context. I am a Christian pastor who also seeks to articulate the interspiritual reality and vision in a Christian context. Even though you are not Christian, have you any thoughts on how to do that in my context?
Yeah, it's because I'm not a Christian that I have thoughts on how to do that in your context, because I'm not bound by the baggage of being a pastor. So I do have thoughts on this, but you'll have to help me fill in the blanks. One of my favorite passages, and I believe Bibles, whether it's the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Bible, Quran, whatever it is, I believe scriptures are made by people, and so that they contain two kinds of material. Stupid people write stupid material, evil material, harsh material, vile material, misogynist material, all that. And I try to identify that and ignore it. Then there are brilliant, spiritually awake people who write spiritually awake material and put it in the mouths of the characters that they're using in their writing. In John, where does Jesus say, I am the way, the truth, and the life? John 14:16, John 16:14. Somebody can Google it and find it. We won't put Jeffrey on the spot, but somebody want to Google it, we can put it in the chat so we know what we're talking about. But Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. So if you are a mainstream Christian thinker, which means you're caught in the silo of Christianity and you're not a mystic, then you imagine that Jesus is saying, I, Jesus, not you, right? Not you, Renee, not you, Craig, not you, Marie. I, Jesus, and Jesus alone, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody gets to God except through me. So get in line, people, because it's all about me. That's mainstream Christianity. That's not perennial wisdom. That's not a perennial wisdom Christianity. But that's not what he's saying. I know that's not what he's saying because Jesus is a Jew. And there's no Jew who says that. Jesus, when you read Jesus in the constant, because, obviously this is written by people, it's not, but I think John was a mystic, or whoever wrote that line was a mystic. And if Jesus said anything like that, as a Jew, he said it as a Jew. And if you listen to it in a Jewish context, when Jesus says, I am, a Jewish listener is going to hear not I, Jesus, am the way, the truth, and life. They're going to hear Ehyeh. Ehyeh is the revelation of God's name in Exodus 3, verse 14, where Moses says to God, what's your name? Or tell me your true nature. And God's first response is, I am what I'm becoming, or I am what I am, depends how the English translates it. But in Hebrew, God says, my name is Ehyeh, E-H-Y-E-H. It's the first person of the Hebrew verb to be. I'm what's happening, man. Right? If he was living in the 60s. So God's name is Ehyeh, or I am. So when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he's saying Ehyeh is the way, the truth, and the life. This I am consciousness is the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody gets to God except through Ehyeh, except through this I am consciousness. Now, I believe, right, I'm asserting without evidence, I believe that Jesus was one of those awake human beings, that Jesus was a great Jewish mystic who achieved, what Paul calls metanoia, going beyond the mind. He achieved, Buddha mind, cosmic consciousness, Christ mind, mochin de gadlut in Hebrew, spacious mind. He achieved the realization that Atman is Brahman. I'm mixing as many religious metaphors or much religious language as possible. He realized that he was the divine, the way a wave is the ocean, or the other way around, the ocean is the wave. He realized that he was the Ehyeh, that the Ehyeh was him and everything else. So he's telling us, Jesus is in this passage, he's telling us, if you want to get to the absolute, you have to change your consciousness and shift from the egoic I am, to the cosmic I am. And once you make that change, that's the first point of perennial wisdom. Everything, well, actually, that's the second point. The first point is Ehyeh. The second point is you can make that shift. Once you make that shift, loving your neighbor is axiomatic, and that's it. I mean, perennial wisdom just falls into place. So the key to a perennial wisdom Christianity is to understand that passage of John and then to make it a practice. And Christianity is, I guess you say replete, is that the right word? Is filled with contemplative practices from the most, what Father Thomas and, who did he work with? I guess the name just went out of my head, to create centering prayer. Basil Pennington. So
and Father William Menninger.
Yes, right, to create centering prayer, or who created the worldwide Christian meditation movement. Who did that? I can't remember. Lawrence
Freeman.
Freeman, right? So those are modern expressions of Christian meditation, but you can go back and look at centuries of Christian meditation practice, contemplative Christian practice, not just meditation. And they'll all take you to the Ehyeh, which is your truest nature. So you never have to leave Christianity to get perennial Christianity. You never have to leave Judaism to get perennial Judaism, or Islam to get perennial Islam. You just have to go to the mystics and not to the maniacs who run these religions. I love alliteration. Go from the maniacs to the mystics. That'll preach. Jeffrey says that'll preach. Probably not.
As we started today, Rabbi Rami, you talked about the being a blessing. I wonder if you can say a little bit more about that for us. How you envision us really doing that in terms of our from our beingness to our practical, everyday living and encounters. How do you envision? How do you support?
Well, there's a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pick a place to start. So one place to start is pay attention to your language. Be careful not to use language that otherizes people. I think I picked this one because it just popped into my head, but I think I picked this one because this is one of my personal, I have a real problem with this. I tend to, otherize, to demonize groups of people, mostly Fox News watchers, but not just. So, people who disagree with me politically, not religiously. I don't, if they disagree with me religiously, it's okay. But people who are making excuses for the fact that we have no gun laws, serious gun laws in this country, that AR-15s are okay. We just had this mass shooting in Nashville, and I'm just outside of Nashville, and the congressman who lives in that district, said, "Well, we're not going to do anything about it. It's got nothing we can do. Just thoughts and prayers. That's all you mean." Or another Tennessee congressman who sent out a Christmas card with his entire family, with the exception of one of his little kids, all standing next to their Christmas tree, holding AR-15s. I mean, those people make me so crazy that when I speak about them in a way that makes them other. So I have to constantly guard my language to keep from doing that, because they're manifestations of God also. That doesn't excuse them. I don't want them to I don't want to say, "Oh, it's okay, they can do whatever they want." That's not my position, but I don't want to demonize them. So I have to be careful, or everyone should be careful how we use our language. It's easy to see how other people use language to demonize, right? I mean, the way so many of us talk about trans people, LGBTQIA people. I mean, all that, it's just the way people talk about Black people, the way they talk about Jewish people or Asian people. So language, guarding in Judaism is called Shmirat HaLashon, guarding your language to make sure it's not perpetuating evil, is one place to start. Another place to start is in Psalm 16. And again, we'd have to look up the actual Psalm, and I've got a Bible here. I could do it, but it'll take me a minute. But I think it's Psalm 16. Either it's the first verse or right up close to the beginning. There's a line in Hebrew, it says, Shiviti, and then it gives you the name of God, Lenegdi Tamid. And in English, it says, I place the divine before me always. Now, because you can't pronounce the name of God, you can put in euphemisms. I like Shekhinah, which is the divine feminine. So I say, this is a mantra you can use, Shiviti Shekhinah Lenegdi Tamid, or in English, I place the divine before me always. And the practice that goes with the line, the mantra, is when you're out walking around, which I do, 7-10 miles a day. Whenever you're drawing near to someone, and it could be an animal also, but I'm more concerned when I'm walking with people. When I'm drawing close to someone, you say in your head, as you look at them and you say to yourself, Shiviti Shechina Lenegdi Tamid, I place the divine before me always, to see that person as a manifesting of God, so that when I get close enough to actually interact, I don't, move away. I don't turn away. I make eye contact. I make eye contact like you would when you say namaste in Indian culture. I don't bow, but I smile. I say hello because I'm meeting God. And this is especially important when I'm meeting a homeless person or a person. We have a number of people who are mentally challenged, and they're often very angry. And I don't want to put myself in danger, but I don't want to otherize or demonize those people. So I remind myself as I get closer, don't endanger yourself, but Shiviti Shechina Lenegdi Tamid. This too is a holy being. Treat that person as a holy being. So watch your language. Remind yourself that everyone you're encountering is a divine being. Other ways to be a blessing: watch what you eat. In Judaism, we talk about kashrut, kosher. Kosher means fit. What's fit for a human being? From the Jewish point of view, to make it as simple as possible, there's two principles. One is don't cause animals unnecessary suffering. Now, you get to decide what that is. For me, that means don't eat them. And the other thing is, I'm trying to translate it into English. Bal tashchid is like, don't waste resources. So I don't know how you'd translate that into more practical things, but elevate all of your consumption to the highest ethical and environmental values you can muster. I mean, those are all ways to be a blessing. There's a lot more. I would recommend, and I'm going to stop because you could just go on indefinitely, but I would recommend a book, Timothy Snyder's, do I have it here? It's on the other side of my desk. I can't reach it. Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. It's a little tiny book. You can read it in an hour and a half, maybe. But he's got these things that you can do. Some of them are more practical than others, but things you can do to make a difference in the world for the better. And some of them, I think he includes the speech one, though I'm drawing from the Jewish tradition. But there's lots of simple things you can do to be a blessing. And those are just some that are off the top of my head.
Thank you for starting our process with that. Yeah, and for the recommendation. We do have another question that's been typed into the chat from Mary Beth. Can you speak to the challenges of being together in community, worshiping in community together, and your vision for how to proceed, especially as institutional churches are becoming more conservative, i.e. Roman Catholic, and belief-based? How do we deeply worship together in this spiritually independent time?
Okay, before I even attempt to comment on that question, never mind answer it, I don't have a community. Right? I used to have a synagogue. I no longer do that. I don't miss being in community. I find the politics of community really off-putting. I am not a hermit. Wayne Teasdale used to live above, at the Catholic Center at the University of Chicago. He got in a little garret. That would suit me. So take what I'm going to say with a grain of salt. The challenge of being together in community is being together in community. People are annoying. So there has to be the community has to be intentional and not accidental. And the fact that you're all Catholics or you're all Jews or you're all Baptists or you're all Buddhists isn't enough. I remember when I first met Father Thomas, I was in my 20s, I guess, probably in my 30s. And I had such a romanticized vision of what it was like to be in a monastery. And he went into the monastery when he was 16. And, I always struggled between, should I be a householder or should I be a monk? And, I made the householder choice, but I always fantasized, maybe I should have been a monk. And I talked to him once about how perfect it must have been in the monastery, because especially he went in before Vatican II. It was silent. No one spoke. And I said, what was that like? It must have been so peaceful. And he said, well, we used to wear chalkboards around our neck because we couldn't speak, but we could write. And we learned how to write backwards so that I could write and other people could read it. And I was romanticized. Oh man, that must have been so beautiful. And, I could see people writing, bless you, brother, and have a wonderful day. And he says, well, it really wasn't like that. It was more like, you're such a jerk, and then we'd write it and then erase it really fast, and he said, we were just people and we just learned how to do all the things that people do really fast and backwards on the chalkboard. So it was just the same thing. He burst my bubble, my fantasy about being a monk. But in an intentional community, it's a little easier. When you have a bigger vision that we're all striving for, maybe that helps. My community experience is more people thrown together because they're Jews and this is their neighborhood and they chose to join this community. But as churches become more conservative, if you're not, if you're on the liberal end, you got to move out. I don't want to spend 10 minutes trying to change a community that's happy doing what it's doing, even if what it's doing is, in my estimation, evil. You can't change it, I don't think. So I would move out and try to find another community if I needed a community. But the last part of this is something that I do feel I have some insight into. How do we deeply worship together in this spiritually interdependent time? That's something that I learned from Father Thomas. And not just Father Thomas. And what I learned is, shut up. That liturgy is not worship. Silence is worship. It says in the Bible, talking to God, it says, to you, silence is praise. Quakers know how to do it, right? People should come together in a beautiful setting, whether it's a building or nature, whatever it happens to be, forest bathing, whatever it happens to be. And you sit in silence. Somebody could be saying the Holy Rosary. Somebody could be reciting, like I do every day because of my Ramakrishna. I was not inducted, initiated into the Ramakrishna order of Advaita Vedanta Hinduism, and I promised I would say a certain mantra to Ma Sarada, his wife. So maybe you're saying your mantra to Kali or to Ma Sarada or to Krishna, or you're saying you're saying the 99 names of God, whatever it is, but you're sitting together in silence, and it's the being together in the greater silence that pulls the community together. That is a powerful worship experience, if you want to use that term. I was also in, I used to teach for something called the Academy for Spiritual Formation. It's a Methodist retreat program, fabulous program, where you would go 4 times a year, you go away for a week, 4 times a year. You'd have the same faculty, but different teachers at each retreat. And in the afternoon, I forget what they called it, but they had this meditation period where everyone came with their own practice. Some of the practices were meditation, some of the practices were reading a book, some of them were knitting, crocheting, but they all had to be silent practices. You couldn't go and bang on a drum while someone else was trying to be quiet. But they were all silent practices, but you could do whatever you wanted, but you did it in community. And that also worked. So it seems to me the power of silence, the power of getting beyond the language of liturgies and just being together in silence. That to me is the gift of interspirituality. When we have a liturgy, in my experience, and I write liturgy, I argue with the liturgy, even my own. That's not the right word. That's not what I really meant. That takes me into, nah, that's not good. But when you sit in silence, you go to a Quaker meeting and you sit there for an hour and it ends with a handshake. Oh, it doesn't get any better than that, especially if there's food afterwards.
Thank you so much. And we are at our time. Can't believe
Oh,
it.
it
But
went very
It
quickly.
went so quickly, and
I talked too much, Jan. I'm sorry.
that's what you were here for.
Oh, okay.
We're so glad to have shared this time with you. And all of you will be given contact information also, once again, for Rabbi Rami and his website and many projects.
And if I could, Jan, if I can just add one last thing, Jeanette mentioned that I work for Spirituality and Health magazine. I write their Q&A column, spiritual Q&A column. If you have questions like the ones you wrote, if you send them to me, I'll pass them on to my editors, and they won't use your name and they'll chop them down so they're like usually one-liners. But I'm always looking for questions. My big fear with the magazine is people will stop sending questions. I've been doing this 6 times a year for the last 16 years. I've never run out of people sending questions, but it could still happen. So if you have questions you want to send them to me at Rabbi Rami. Send it to me. My email is rabbirami@gmail.com, and maybe they'll, put them in the magazine.
Great suggestion. Thank you. Thank you. We can definitely do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Thank you for being with us. And Jeanette, did you want to say anything before we close out here? Say goodbye?
Only deep gratitude. Thank you so very much for this conversation, and we'll be continuing it.
My pleasure, as always.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.